Okay, we're going to learn about some lab equipment today. We're going to use lots of different kinds of lab equipment, and there are many different kinds. Every piece of lab equipment is designed for a specific purpose. Okay, and as I mentioned, there's lots of different equipment. We're going to focus right now on the ones that we'll probably end up using in this class, although you'll probably come across lots of different equipment as you continue on with your education and doing different sciences. On the left here you have a mortar and a pestle. They're used for grinding solids into a fine powder. Some of you might have one of these at home. People sometimes use them in the kitchen to grind herbs into finer herbs so that they can put it into tea or different dishes. A watch glass is sort of like a contact lens shape, and it's used as a lid on top of a beaker when you're heating liquids to keep things from splattering out. Some of the glassware that we will use in this class include a graduated cylinder. Graduated cylinder has lots of different tick marks, many tick marks on the side of it to help measure very precise volumes of liquids. So if you need a very specific volume of liquid, then you would want to use one of these to measure that out. An Erlenmeyer flask is used for heating liquids or even measuring and holding liquids, and it has a narrow neck. That narrow neck is used for, it's really good for helping to keep heat inside of the flask while you're heating liquids, but it's also good for using to swirl the liquid around if you need to mix things in, and it helps to keep things from splashing out. Here's a beaker, sort of your all-purpose tool for measuring liquids. It's good for holding liquids too, or mixing and heating. So it's pretty much good for everything, although it's not particularly good at any single purpose. You can also use it for holding solids as well. Here you have a test tube. Test tube is used for performing chemical reactions or little experiments inside of the test tube when you want to see what's going on inside of the test tube. You're going to make sure that you use a test tube rack to hold it up in, because you see the rounded bottom makes it very difficult to stand it up. So when you want to put it down, you're going to need to slide it into this rack to keep things from spilling out. And in order to hold a test tube when you're heating it, you want to use a test tube holder. It's a special kind of tong. And when you're holding a test tube with the tongs and you're heating anything, you want to make sure you keep this open end pointed away from anyone while you're doing the experiment. Things can splash out, get into your eyes, although you should be wearing your goggles. You also don't want to smell any vapors that might be coming out of there. For heating equipment, we'll use a hot plate. It's powered by electricity. It's used for heating chemicals, but it can work rather slowly. So scientists sometimes use a Bunsen burner, which uses gas to provide a flame for heating chemicals. And it's a little more complicated, though, because you have a lot of equipment that goes with it. You end up using the ring stand to hold things up, an iron ring that sort of serves as a holder that a wire gauze support sits on in order to transfer heat through to whatever you're heating above the flame. The benefit to this is that it works really quickly to heat liquids. For finding out how much of something you have, you're going to want to measure its mass. So here's a digital scale. It's used for measuring mass. We would be using grams because we're sticking to the metric system for our units. A meter stick, which is going to measure length. So if you need to measure the length of something, you're going to use one of these. Again, we're using the metric system, so you're going to be getting that measurement in millimeters, centimeters, or in meters. And if you need to measure the temperature, you will use a thermometer. You can get that in degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit. Celsius is our temperature reading for the metric system. When you're measuring mass, for this class, we'll be using a triple beam balance. Again, that's for finding out how much of something you have, how much stuff there is. That's the mass. So again, we'll be measuring in grams. And from time to time, you're going to need to transfer items from one container to another. So if you are going to move a hot beaker, you're going to want to use these tongs. They work like scissors. They would open and close. You would hold the end with the handle here and close this end around a hot beaker in order to move it from one location to another. Funnels are used for transferring liquids from large containers to smaller ones. You may have one of these at home. Sometimes people use them in their kitchen. Others use them for putting oil or other liquids into the engine of their car. Here's a spatula. It's used for transferring solid chemicals from a larger container to a smaller container. It's just sort of a special kind of spoon. And for measuring small amounts of liquids, we have two options. A pipette, and the pipette you see has those little increments on the side there that help you measure very precise measurements of liquid. So you would use that for very, very small, precise amounts of liquid. But if you just need a drop or two, or a certain number of drops of a liquid, you would use a dropper, and that's for transferring liquids a drop at a time. Okay, so now you know about some of the equipment that we'll be using. It's time to do some practice.